Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. We will be learning today Mirza Hashem, Daf Tez Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Tzitzis, and we pick up today on Tez Zayin Amid Aleph, Siman Ches, at the end of Sif Tez Zayin, in the words of the Ramah. So here in Sif Tez Zayin, the Mechaber discussed a case of Halon B'talisai Balayla. Somebody slept overnight wearing, let's say, his talis cotton. And the Mechaber Paskind, he said, Tzarich levarech alav baboker, you have to make a new berachah on the talis cotton in the morning, even if you did not take it off. And we explained in the Mishnah Berurah the reason for this. The Mechaber Paskins like the Shitas HaRambam. The Rambam holds that Laila lavzman tzitzits. Laila is not a time of chiyuv of tzitzits. So, even if you would be wearing at night a beged shel yom, you're wearing a four-cornered garment that you normally wear during the day, at night, it's not chayiv in tzitzis. Why? Because at night there is no chayiv of tzitzis. Therefore, if you're wearing a talis cotton overnight, at night it wasn't chayiv in tzitzis. So the nighttime period formed a hefsek in your mitzvah of tzitzis, simply because there is no mitzvah of tzitzis at night. Therefore, when the morning comes along, you have to make a new bracha, because now you're being mekayim the mitzvah once again by wearing a beged of dal kanfas that is properly affixed with tzitzis. So that's what the Mechaber said. You went to sleep, you slept overnight, wearing your talis cotton. In the morning, you have to make a new bracha. And the Mechaber added on to that here in Sif Tez Zayin, and he said, "V'toiv lemashmesh boi b'shas bracha." It would be good to finger the tzitzis, to hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. Now, what does holding the tzitzis when you make the bracha accomplish? So we had earlier in Sif Yud, I believe it was, in Sif Yud, yes, on your Daled Amud Beis, in Sif Yud, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Chav Gimel. Over there, the Mechaber was discussing a slightly different case. Over there he said, what do you do if you get up in the morning and you put on your talis cotton right away before you wash the tilas yadayim? Now, normally, you would make the bracha before you put the tzitzis on. But over here, you can't make the bracha before you put the tzitzis on because you still have yadayim mulach lachos. Your hands are unclean and you can't recite a bracha. So you put on your tzitzis, you can't make a bracha yet. So the Mechaber said, what do? He said, you put it on without a bracha. Ukeshayital yadav, and after you wash the tilas yadayim, yamashmesh batzitzis, you should finger your tzitzis, you should hold your tzitzis, v'yavarich alav, and you should make the bracha. And over there in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Chav Gimel, the Chavetz Chaim told us what is the point of yamashmesh batzitzis. What does that accomplish? Says the Mishnah Berurah, de bazeh yechashev ktsas ki'ilu loiv shoy oz. By fingering the tzitzis, by holding the tzitzis, that's a little bit like you're putting it on now. And if you look at the Sharet Tzionis, Katan Lamed Hay over there, he brings this down from the Beis Yosef. And if you take a look at the Beis Yosef explains like this. The Beis Yosef says that the truth is, when you're wearing tzitzis, you're performing the mitzvah of tzitzis on an ongoing basis. So every minute during the day that you're wearing a talis cotton, you're performing mitzvahs. Every minute you're performing a mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. Therefore, says the Beis Yosef, that by holding your tzitzis, you weren't able to make a bracha over lasiyasai. Normally you make a berachas ha-mitzvahs before you do the mitzvah, right? You make a bracha asher kiddushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu al netilas lulav, before you accomplish the mitzvah. You're holding the lulav, but you're holding the esrog upside down. So you make the bracha before you perform the mitzvah, then you turn the esrog the right way, and you perform the mitzvah. So normally we would make the bracha on tzitzits over lasiyasai. We would make the bracha before we put the tzitzits on. In the case at Sif Yud, as is true over here as well, in the case at Sif Yud, you couldn't make the bracha over lasiyasai because your hands were unclean. So you put on the tzitzits without making the bracha. Now, says the Mechaber, when you're ready to make the bracha, yamashmesh batzitzits, hold on to the tzitzits, and you're making a bracha now on all of the mitzvahs of levishas tzitzis that you're going to be accomplishing mikanu lahaba. So there is a certain aspect of over lasiyasai. Because it's not that you put on the tzitzis in the morning and you accomplished the mitzvah and that was it, and now you're making the bracha after you accomplished the mitzvah. No, you're making the bracha over l'asiyasai because every minute you're continuing to be mekayim the mitzvah. So therefore it's appropriate to hold the tzitzis that you're making the bracha on and make the bracha over l'asiyasai mikanu lahaba because you're still going to be performing the mitzvah. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says in Ois Katan Yud. Over here in Sif Yud in Ois Katan Chav Gimel. Over here in Sif Tez Zayin, the Mechaber said in this case where you slept overnight in the Talis Katan, the Mechaber doesn't say v'tzarich lamashmesh b'shas bracha. He doesn't say you have to hold the tzitzis. He says v'toiv lemashmesh b'shas bracha. You slept the whole night in the Talis Katan. Now you woke up in the morning. Overnight you weren't mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis because Laila lavs man tzitzitzu. Now because you had a hefsek, you're going to make a new bracha. Over here the Mechaber says toiv, it would be good lemashmesh b'shas bracha to hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. But he doesn't say that you have to. In Sif Yud, when the Mechaber said this, when he spoke about somebody who puts on tzitzis before washing the tilis yadayim, over there he says, Yemashmesh patzitzis, you should hold the tzitzis v'yavarech alav, and make a bracha. Over here, in Sif Tez Zayin, he says, V'toiv lemashmesh b'shas bracha. It would be good to hold the tzitzis b'shas bracha. So we're going to have to see what's the difference between Sif Yud, where the Mechaber doesn't say it would be good, he says, Yamashmesh, you should hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. And over here, where the Mechaber says, V'toiv lemashmesh b'shas bracha, it would be good. Now we're going to go to the Ramah, and we're going to see that this distinction takes on added importance, and we have to figure this out. Says the Ramah like this. The Ramah now addresses another case, where this is also negeah. Says the Ramah, V'chein, and similarly, this is 3 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch Tezayin Amud Aleph. V'chein, and similarly, Yaseh mi shaloivesh talisai kaidem sheyair hayoim. The Ramah brings down from Nagos Maimoni. What happens if you get up very early in the morning, you got up before Alois, and you put on your tzitzits before Alois? Now again, before Alois, Laila lavs man tzitzits. So you can't make the bracha on the tzitzis before Alois. So once again, you're in a situation where you're wearing your tzitzits already at a time that you cannot make the bracha. Says the Ramah, V'chein yaseh mishaloivish talisai kaidem sheyar hayom. The same way the Mechaber just said, that if you slept overnight in your talis katan, when you, in the morning, you have to make a new bracha on your talis katan, and when you make that bracha, you should hold on to the tzitzis. Says the Ramah, the same thing applies if you put on your tzitzis before Alois, so you can't make a bracha, and you're going to wait until after Alois. After Alois, you're going to make the bracha. Again, you should hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. Comes along the Mishnah Berurah, says the Mishnah Berurah is cut mem gimel. Mishnah Berurah brings down a very interesting Taz. The Taz says that the word v'chein in the Ramah is not meduyik. Why? Because he says, what did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said you slept overnight, your talis katan. In the morning you have to make a bracha on the talis katan. The Mechaber said, make a bracha, v'toiv, and it would be good that you should hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. Are you mechuyev to? Taz says no. The Mechaber doesn't say you have to. The Mechaber says it would be good to. Comes along the Ramah, and the Ramah follows up on the words of the Mechaber with a different case. What's the Ramah's case? The Ramah's case is not that you slept overnight in your talis katan. You put on your talis katan before Alois. Can't make a bracha before Alois. Now you're going to make the bracha after Alois. Says the Ramah, V'chein, the same way the Mechaber said, if you slept overnight in your talis katan, when you make the bracha on the talis katan in the morning, you should hold on. It's good to hold on to the tzitzis. V'chein, in the Ramah's case, where you put on the tzitzis before Alois. Says the Taz, no. In the Mechaber's case, it's toiv lamashmesh. In the Mechaber's case, you don't have to. It's only a good thing if you do. It's a nice thing to do, but you don't have to. But says the Taz, in the Ramah's case, you have to. In the Ramah's case, you have to be memashmesh in the tzitzis. Let's see the words of the Mishnah Berurah inside. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut mem gimel. V'chein yaseh ayin betaz. The Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the Taz Shekosov writes, Tahai v'chein eino meduktuk, that the word v'chein in the Ramah is not really meduyik. De bazeh, because in the Ramah's case, when you put on the tzitzis before alois, and now you're going to make a bracha after alois, the bazeh tzarech midino lemashmesh baboker. In this case, you must hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. Kishu mevarach al talis, when you make the bracha. Now, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't explain this. So, what are we left with? What we're left with right now is like this. If we take Sif Tez Zayin alone, we have one case of the Mechaber, one case of the Ramah. Case of the Mechaber is you slept overnight in your talis cotton. Laila lavs man tzitzits. The night, not as man tzitzits. So the night is a hefsik between your performance of the mitzvah of tzitzis yesterday and your performance of the mitzvah of tzitzis today. So you wake up in the morning, you're wearing a talis cotton. The Mechaber said you have to make a new bracha because you had a hefsik between yesterday and today. Now, are you taking off your tzitzis and putting it back on? No. You woke up in the morning wearing your tzitzis. You woke up 8 o'clock in the morning. It's after alois. So overnight, Laila lavs man tzitzis. Now 8 o'clock in the morning, it is as man tzitzis. Make a bracha on the tzitzis. Said the Mechaber, v'toiv, it would be good, lemashresh b'tzitzis. It would be a good thing to hold on to the tzitzis. Are you mechuyev to when you make the bracha? No, you're not mechuyev to. But it would be a good thing too. Says the Ramah, you got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's before alois. You put on your tzitzis. You can't make a bracha. So you're going to wait till 6 o'clock. It's going to be after alois. Now you're going to make a bracha. The Ramah says, v'chein. The same way the Mechaber said, you should hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. In this case also, you should hold the tzitzis when you make the bracha. Says the Taz, not v'chein. These two cases are very different. In the Mechaber's case, you have to hold the tzitzis. In the Mechaber's case, you do not have to hold the tzitzis. It's a nice thing to hold the tzitzis, but you don't have to. In the Ramah's case, you have to hold the tzitzis. This is what the Mishnah Berurah brings down from the Taz. But what's the explanation? What's the difference between the Mechaber's case, where it's a nice thing to hold the tzitzis, and the Ramah's case, where the Taz says you have to hold the tzitzis? So, if you look in the Taz, what the Taz says is like this. The Taz says that in the Ramah's case, you put on the tzitzis before alois. Maybe you put on the tzitzits a half hour before alois. Now, 35 minutes later, you're ready to make a bracha. Says the Taz, if you make the bracha without holding the tzitzits now, then it looks like you're making a bracha on the levisha that you did a half hour ago. A half hour ago, you put on tzitzits, right? You woke up in the morning. You woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You were wearing your pajamas. You weren't wearing your talis cotton. You took your talis cotton. You put on your talis cotton. You weren't able to make a bracha. But let's say alois is coming in 10 minutes. Let's say alois is coming in 15 minutes. Let's say alois is coming in a half hour. If a half hour from now, you go make a bracha without holding the tzitzits, it looks like you're making a bracha on the levisha that you did before alois. And you can't make a bracha on the levisha that you did before alois. Because before alois is Laila. And Laila loves man tzitzis. Therefore, says the Taz, in the Ramah's case, when you make the bracha after alois, you must hold the tzitzits. Because by holding the tzitzits, you're showing, I'm making a bracha on now and forward. I'm making a bracha mikanu lahaba. That's why I'm holding the tzitzits now. Because I'm making a bracha on the tzitzits now. The bracha doesn't go back on the levisha, on the putting on of the talis cotton that I did a half hour ago. It can't go back on that. Because that was before alois. That was Laila. So my bracha doesn't go back on that. My bracha goes on now and going forward. So says the Taz, in the Ramah's case, you put on the tzitzis before halachos and you're making the bracha after halachos, you must hold the tzitzis to show that the bracha goes mikanu lahaba. But in the mechaber's case, says the Taz, that's not true. In the mechaber's case, what happened? You made a bracha Monday morning on your tzitzis, and you made a perfect bracha. You woke up Monday morning. You woke up 7 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning. It was after halachos. You went, you washed netilas yadayim, you took your talis cotton, you made a bracha, you put it on, you kissed your tzitzits. Beautiful. All day Monday, you continued to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. Monday night, you went to sleep, and you went to sleep wearing your talis cotton. Overnight, Laila lavzman tzitzis. You weren't mekayim the mitzvah overnight. Tuesday morning, you woke up at 7 o'clock after halachos, and you're wearing a talis cotton. Says the mechaber, make a bracha. Says the mechaber, when you make the bracha, toiv, it would be good that you should hold the tzitzits. But says the Taz, over there you don't have to. Because over there, what are you afraid of? You're afraid that somebody's going to say that the bracha that you're making now goes back on a time that you weren't allowed to make a bracha? What should it go back on? When's the last time you put on this talis cotton? The last time you put on this talis cotton was Monday morning. And Monday morning you made a bracha. So it can't be going back on Monday morning. So what is it going back on? It's going back on before halachos Monday night? Why would anybody think that the bracha that you're making now goes back on then? You didn't do a levisha. You didn't put on your talis cotton in the middle of the night. The last time you put on the talis cotton was Monday morning. And Monday morning, you made a bracha when you put it on. So says the Taz, in the mechaber's case, there's no need. You don't have to hold the tzitzits when you make the bracha, because there's no fear that anybody is going to think that the bracha that you're making now is going back on a time that was inappropriate for the bracha. Because there was no levisha that you did at a time that was inappropriate for a bracha. The last levisha that you did was Monday morning. And Monday morning you made a bracha. So Monday morning's levisha was already covered by a bracha. So Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, you could make a bracha and you don't have to hold the tzitzis. Says the mechaber, it would be nice to hold the tzitzis. Why would it be nice? Because like the Mishnah Berurah said in Sif Yud previously, because by holding the tzitzits, it's a little bit like you're making a levisha now, and that makes the bracha shtickle over l'asiyasai, because the bracha is going mikanu lahaba. So it makes the bracha a little bit over l'asiyasai, but you don't have to. So here we have the two cases of Sif Tez Zayin. In Sif Tez Zayin, we have the mechaber's case where it's not necessary to hold the tzitzits, but it's a nice thing. We have the Ramah's case where it's necessary to hold the tzitzis. Why? Because if you don't hold the tzitzis, it looks like you're making a bracha on putting on the talis cotton before halachos, and you're not allowed to put on a talis cotton before halachos. Now, how do we apply that to the earlier case of Sif Yud? In Sif Yud, what happened? Somebody woke up in the morning, after halachos, not before halachos. Somebody woke up 7 o'clock in the morning, and he took his talis cotton, and he put on his talis cotton. But he couldn't make a bracha. You know why? Because he didn't wash the netilas yadayim yet. Really, we learned you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to wait until after you wash the netilas yadayim to put on the tzitzis. But maybe this person put on his talis cotton before the netilas yadayim because he doesn't want to walk Daled Amos. He doesn't have a negavas shissel by his bed. He has to go to the Beis HaKisei in order to wash the netilas yadayim. So he's going to have to walk Daled Amos. He didn't want to walk Daled Amos without tzitzits. So he put on his talis cotton before the netilas yadayim, but he couldn't make a bracha. So the mechaber told us, what should he do? After he washes the netilas yadayim, he should make the bracha. And over there, the mechaber didn't say v'toiv. Over there, the mechaber said, yemashmesh b'tzitzits. He should hold his tzitzits. Now, according to this Taz, it's a little puzzling. Why in that case does the mechaber hold that you have to hold the tzitzits? What are you afraid of? You're afraid that people are going to say that the bracha goes back on to the levisha, and the levisha was before netilas yadayim? Would that be so bad? I'm not making the bracha now with yadayim metunafais, my hands are no longer unclean. I'm making the bracha now after netilas yadayim. So you mashmesh betzitzis, because if you don't, it's going to look like the berachah was going back on when I put on the talis cotton when my hands were unclean. Is that such a bad thing? I don't know. It looks like, yeah. According to this Taz, it looks like that's why the Mechaber said in Sif Yud that you must be memashmesh betzitzis after the Netilas Yadayim. Okay, a fascinating Taz. Now we move along. Let's go to Sif Yud Zayin. 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Tez Zayin Amid Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Niskase bebeged shuchayiv betzitzis v'loy hitl by tzitzis. Let's say you put on a beged of dalet kanfos, you put on a 4-cornered garment, and it does not have tzitzis affixed to it. Says the Mechaber, bitel mitzvahs tzitzis. What you are doing is you're being mevatel on mitzvah saseh. You have a mitzvah saseh that when you wear a beged of dalet kanfos, you have to put tzitzis on it. You're wearing a beged of dalet kanfos without tzitzis, you're being mevatel on mitzvah aseh. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut mem dal mitzvah tzitzis. Points out the Mishnah Berurah that what the reason the Mechaber is telling this to you is because there's a piece of lamdus that the Mechaber wants you to understand. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the tzitzis chayvas gavra le'inyan zeh. The point that the Mechaber is making is, and we've seen this previously, you could have a drawer full of 4-cornered garments that do not have tzitzis on them, and you're not being mevatel on mitzvah saseh. You want to have 34-cornered shirts that don't have tzitzis on them hanging in your closet, you're not being mevatel on mitzvah saseh. There's no chiyuv to put tzitzis on a 4-cornered shirt that's hanging in your closet. The chiyuv is when you wear a 4-cornered garment. If you are wearing a 4-cornered garment, there is a mitzvah saseh to put tzitzis on it. So if you wear a 4-cornered garment and you do not put on tzitzis, then you are being mevatel a mitzvah saseh. That's the point that the Mechaber is making here. Shem niskase betalis oz chalol avachiv. It's when you put on a 4-cornered garment, that's when you get the chiv of tzitzis. Ayin Siman Yud Zayin. And I always point out, whenever we learn this halacha, let's remember, nobody should make the argument, I don't wear a talis cotton because there's no chiv to wear a talis cotton. There's only a chiv of tzitzis. If I happen to be wearing a 4-cornered garment, I have a chiv of tzitzis. Nowadays, we don't really wear 4-cornered garments, so why do I have to bother with this mitzvah of tzitzis? Chas v'shalom, we're going to see that Klal Yisrael was mekabel on themselves that we put on a 4-cornered garment in order to be chayiv in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And I'm going to keep on repeating this. This is a mitzvah that the Satan goes after, because the Satan doesn't want us to have automatic schusim. This is Chazal say, afilu harekanin shebehem, even the empty members of Klal Yisrael are malei mitzvahs karimain, they're full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate is full of seeds. Why? One of the reasons is because we put on a talis cotton in the morning, and we walk around all day being mekayim the mitzvah say of tzitzis. So all day long, we're racking up automatic schusim. The Satan, the Yetzer Hara, can't take that idea. And that's why they chase down the mitzvah of tzitzis, and they tell people, don't wear a talis cotton. You need another layer of clothing. It's hot outside. And you're working, and you're going to get sweated up. And, and the tzitzis are so expensive, and they're going to get sweaty, and they're hard to wash. 1,000 excuses not to wear a talis cotton. You should wear a talis cotton every day, all day. If you got up in the morning and you didn't put on your tzitzis and you came down for breakfast, your mommy looked at you and said, are you wearing tzitzis? So don't be kal when it comes to the mitzvah of tzitzis. Okay, now we embark on Siman Tes. Tezayin Amid Beis Siman Tes says the Mechaber, Eza begadim chayavim b'tzitzis, which types of garments are obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis, ve'eza peturim mitzitzis, and which types of garments are exempt from tzitzis, u'boivav se'ifim, and here we have 6 se'ifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Ein chayiv b'tzitzis min HaTorah, there is no da'araisa dika chiyav of tzitzis, ela beged pishtim oy shel tzemer rechelim. The Mechaber paskins that the chiyuv of tzitzis mid'araisa only applies to materials that are made out of one of 2 fabrics, either linen, pishtim, flax, either a linen garment or a woolen garment. And when we say wool, we mean specifically the wool of a sheep. Tzemer rechelim. So this is the psak of the Mechaber. The Mechaber holds, da'araisa, you have a beged of daled kanfus of cotton. Cotton is not chayiv midaraisa, says the Mechaber. Cotton is only chayiv midarabanan. You have a beged made out of polyester, for sure, which is plastic, it's synthetic. Not chayiv in tzitzis, certainly not midaraisa, according to the Mechaber. No chayiv, only tzemer upishtim. And tzemer means tzemer rechelim, the wool of sheep. Continues the Mechaber, avo big day sha'ar minim, begadim made out of any other types of fabrics, ein chayavim b'tzitzis, I'm not chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa, ela midarabanan, they're only chayiv midarabanan. The Ramah takes issue, the Ramah says, that takes issue, he brings down the other shita, v'yeshayimrim dekulu chayavim midaraisa, that he does take issue. The Ramah says, there's a yeshayimrim, others say that no, all types of garments are chayiv midaraisa, v'hachi hilchasa. And the Ramah says that indeed that's the halacha. The halacha is that all fabrics are chayiv in tzitzis, not only tzemer upishtim. Okay, let's see what the underlying issue over here is. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ella, the Mechaber said that in his psak, the only types of begadim that are chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa are tzemer upishtim, sheep's wool or flax, linen. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is based on Kiditani Debei Rabbi Yishmael. This is, we can see this in a brisa, Menachas Lamites Amid Beis, the Alfinon Minigoyim, because we learn out the halacha of tzitzits from the halacha of Nigoyim, from the halacha of tzaras on a beged. The parat be'akas of tzemer upishtim, because when the Torah Kedosha speaks about tzaras Nigoyim, nigei begadim, the tzaras that could go on a beged, it refers to a beged as being tzemer upishtim. Af kol mokum diksiv be beged akavanim tzemer upishtim. Since the Torah Kedosha by tzaras specifies that the halachos of nigei begadim apply only to a beged of tzemer upishtim, so we learn out from there that whenever the Torah says beged, it means tzemer upishtim. So when the Torah Kedosha says that we have to put tzitzits on kanfei bigdeihem, on the corners of your garments, what kind of garments? Garments of tzemer upishtim, but not of cotton, not of polyester, not of other fabrics. It has to be tzemer upishtim. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cotton bays, the Mechaber specified that we were talking about tzemer rechelim, the wool of sheep. Now, a rachel is a female sheep. That's what a rachel is, right? Rachel is a girl's name. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cotton bays, rechelim, oi elim zecharim. But it doesn't only mean rechelim, it doesn't only mean female sheep, it also means male sheep. Elim zecharim, an adult male sheep, is what's called a ram. So elim zecharim are male rams. So it's the wool of sheep, whether male or female. Avar shol kol haminim, but any other kind of species, going for example, tzemer gemalim, the wool of camels, v'noitza shel izim, or the hair of goats that was woven into a cloth, v'ashirim, or silken garments, v'tzemer arnovim, or the wool of a hare, H-A-R-E. What is a hare? A hare looks like an overgrown rabbit. It's the same family as a rabbit, but it's not a bunny rabbit. Same way a tiger is the same family as a cat, but a tiger is not a pussycat. So a hare, H-A-R-E, is a larger animal than a rabbit, and it has a wool, but the tzemer arnovim is not chayiv in tzitzis. V'chein canvas, or a canvas in halacha usually means it's made out of the stalks of hemp. So that such a garment would not be chayiv in tzitzis according to the Mechaber. Einon bechlal tzemer upishtim, none of these are included in tzemer upishtim. Now, the different examples that the Mishnah Berurah gave, he gave examples of things that you might think would be included in tzemer, right? Tzemer gemalim, the wool of a camel. Tzemer arnovim, the wool of a hare. Nutza shel izim is the hairy, woolly growth of a goat. You might think that these are included in tzemer. They're not. he also gives us an example of something that's similar to pishtim. Pishtim, linen, is made from the stalks of the flax. Canvas is made from the stalks of hemp. So you might think that that's included in pishtim. It's not. According to the Mechaber, tzemer is tzemer rechelim. Pishtim is linen that comes from flax. Nothing else is chayiv midaraisa in tzitzis. Ve'enam chayavim mitzitzis rak midrabanan. These other types of items are only chayiv in tzitzis midrabanan. Ve'tzemer rachel bas eis. How about if you have the wool of a female sheep that came from a goat? So this is, you mixed different species of animals. Kasa Beis Yosef, the Beis Yosef says that Tzamra Gamken Lechashiv Tzemer, that indeed that wool is not considered Tzemer, V'lo Yehevi Elikisha Arminim, that would be like other minim, and that would be only Chai Midrabanan. Excuse me. Umemela. The Mishnah Berurah says, since all of these different types of species are only Chai Midrabanan and they're not Chai Midaraisa, there's another halacha that's an outgrowth of this. Umemela, hu adin de b'chal elu, the halacha would be that with all of these different species, im asamehen tzitzits. Till now we're talking about if the beged is made from one of these other type of species. So we said you have a beged made out of the wool of a camel, it's not chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa. How about if you made tzitzis strings from one of these other fabrics? So it's not the beged that's made out of one of these other fabrics, it's the strings that are made out of one of these other fabrics. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kol echad behem eino poiter ela b'minoi. If you made tzitzis strings out of the wool of a camel, you could put it on the beged made out of the wool of a camel, and you could use it to patter the beged made out of the wool of the camel with rabbanon. But you cannot take tzitzis made out of camel wool and put them onto a sheep's wool garment, because a sheep's wool garment is chayiv midaraisa, and you could only patter it with strings of tzemer upishtim. You can't cover it with strings made out of camel wool. Tzemer rechelim upishtim shetrafan b'shar minin. Let's say you took sheep's wool or you took linen and you mixed it together with other species. So you spun thread, which is 55% sheep's wool and 45% camel wool. And now you took that yarn and you wove a beged out of it. What's the halacha? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lina basaruba. You would go basaroiv. Im aroiv hu mitzemer upishtim. If the majority is made out of sheep's wool or out of linen, like the case I just gave you. If you made a yarn that's 55% sheep's wool and 45% camel wool, and then you took that yarn and you wove it into a talus of dalit kanfis, it would be chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa, because it's roiv tzemer rechelim. V'em lav midrabanan. If the roiv is made out of a different species, it's only chayiv midrabanan. But the dafka im terafan v'tavan v'asamehen beged. But this that we're saying, that it would be chayiv midaraisa if it's roiv tzemer rechelim, that's only if you actually made a yarn, you actually spun thread out of this blend. Aval, let's say you have a different case. Aval im hashesi mitzemer. We know that when you set up a loom, you have the warp threads and the weft threads, the shesi and the erev. The shesi is the yarn, the strings that you fix onto the loom. The erev, the weft, is the thread that you pass back and forth through the loom as you adjust the threads of the loom. Easy way to remember it is that the weft is the ball of yarn that you pass back and forth from right to left. That's the weft, right to left. The warp is what stays affixed on the loom. So let's say you have like this. Aval im hashesi mitzemer. Let's say you set up the loom with yarn of tzemer rechelim. So the entire loom is set up with tzemer rechelim. Oimi pishtim, or the loom is set up from flax, from linen. Veha erev mishar minim. And now the weft, the erev, is made out of cotton. So what's the halach in that case? Oyibcha, or you did it the other way. The loom is set up with cotton, and the erev is tzemer or pishtim. Ein chayiv l'deirazu rak b'drabanan. According to the Mechaber, you would only be chayiv in this garment midrabanan. Afilu im rubai mitzemer upishtim, even if the roiv happens to be tzemer upishtim. Why? Deshesi erev lechud loy chashiv beged. Because the shesi or the erev, independent of the other one, does not make a beged. So if all of the shesi is tzemer rechelim and all of the erev is cotton, even if the tzemer rechelim, the wool, happens to be roiv, that beged is not chayiv midaraisa, because only the warp, only the shesi is tzemer, and the shesi alone cannot make a beged. As far as what kind of tzitzis you should use to pater that garment, okay, Siv Gimel. So again, according to the psak of the Mechaber, it's only a beged made out of tzemer or pishtim, sheep's wool or linen, that is chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa. Any other kind of beged is only chayiv midarabanan. Siv Kat Gimel in the Mishnah Berurah, Ela midarabanan. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says, what's the nafkamina? What's the practical nafkamina if it's chayiv midaraisa or it's chayiv midarabanan? Says the Mishnah Berurah, after tzarich levarich al mitzvah shehi midarabanan gamkein, as far as making a bracha, you're going to make a bracha either way. So according to the Mechaber, you have two pairs of tzitzis in front of you. One is wool. According to the Mechaber, it's chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa. Then next to it, you have a nice white cotton pair of tzitzis. According to the Mechaber, that cotton pair of tzitzis is only chayiv midarabanan. Asks the Mishnah Berurah, is there a practical nafkamina to this? Either pair of tzitzis that you pick up to put on, you're going to make a bracha. Because whether you're being mekayim the mitzvah daraisa or you're being mekayim the mitzvah d'rabanan, either way you have to make a bracha. So what's the practical nafkamina? Says the Mishnah Berurah, mikamakim nafkamina le'inyan kamedvarim. The Mishnah Berurah says there are many nafkaminas, and he gives us three right here. Aleph, first nafkamina. The yoyser roi lasis begechu yoyser b'min HaTorah. The first nafkamina is that if you are going to put on a talis cotton, you're going to put on a beged of daled kanfus so that you should be mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, you should put on a beged that you know you're going to be mekayim the mitzvah of daraisa. Don't put on a cotton beged where there's a chance that you're only being mekayim the mitzvah of rabbanon. Put on a woolen beged so that you know that you're being mekayim the mitzvah of daraisa. That's nafkamina number one. Beis, nafkamina number two. Im nis'arev loy tzitzis tevuyin lishman, bishaloi lishman. You have 10 sets of tzitzis strings in front of you. But you have a problem. You know that 6 of these sets of tzitzis strings were made properly. They were made lishma. When they were spun and they were prepared, it was done l'shem mitzvah tzitzis. 4 of the other sets of tzitzis strings that are here were not made lishma. Tzitzis, if it's not made lishma, is puzzle. So you have 10 sets of tzitzis strings. You know that 6 of them are kosher. You know that 4 of them are puzzle. But you don't know which is which. They're all mixed. So you have a taruvis. Now, you might look at me and you say, well, Rabbi Weiss, why can't we go basaroiv? Why can't we say 6 are kosher, 4 are puzzle, so the roiv is the 6, the roiv is the kosher. Why don't we say that the 4 are batal baroiv, and it's all kosher? The answer is you can't say that. You know why you can't say that? Because you have to understand what bittul does. I'm not going to get into all the complexities of Yeridea over here. But you have to understand what roiv does. What roiv does is, roiv is capable of saying that if there's a dvar isser, if there's something prohibited in a mixture, it's batal. It's null and void. It's batal b'shishim, right? Yeah, you made something in the kitchen, you made a mistake, you have a tray for ingredient over there. In certain cases, we say it's batal b'shishim. If you have 60 connected it, it's as if it's not there. That's what bittul can do. Bittul can say that it's as if something is not there. But you know what bittul can't do? Bittul cannot make something that it isn't. Bittul cannot make pasal tzitzis kosher. So it's very nice that we could say it's as if the pasal tzitzis aren't there. But if you happen to pick up a set of tzitzis strings that were not made lishma and you put it on the beged is not going to be kosher. You know why? Because those tzitzis strings are still pasal. They were made not lishma. In order for them to be kosher at tzitzis, they have to be made lishma. Bittul can't say that because there are 6 sets of tzitzis strings over here that were made lishma. Now the 4 that are a minority, now they become lishma. No, bittul cannot turn the 4 sets of tzitzis strings that were not made lishma into tzitzis strings that were made lishma. That doesn't work. So you can't use roiv. So again, let's go back. Nachzil in Yonenu. What are we talking about over here? The Mishnah Berurah is giving us nafkaminas if a beged is chayiv midaraisa or midarabanan. So the first nafkamina was, you're going to put on a talis cotton in order to be yaitz in the mitzvah of tzitzis. Use a beged that you know is chayiv midaraisa. So use wool tzitzis that you know are chayiv midaraisa. Don't use cotton tzitzis that might only be chayiv midarabanan. His second nafkamina is, you have a beged of daled kanfas, you need to put tzitzis on it. You have in front of you this mixture of sets of tzitzis strings. You have 6 sets of tzitzis strings that are kosher. You have 4 sets of tzitzis strings that are puzzle, and they're mixed together. Could you use them? Says the Mishnah Berurah, it depends. Im nisarv loy tzitzis tfuyin lishman b'shaloi lishman ve'ein loy tzitzis acherim. If you have this mixture of tzitzis strings that were made lishma and tzitzis strings that were not made lishma, and you don't have any other tzitzis strings, or another case, sheyesh loy safek ala beged imu chayiv b'tzitzis. This beged that you have in front of you, there's a halachic suffix on this garment, whether or not it's chayiv in tzitzis. Maybe we have a suffix whether or not it's considered daled kanfas. Maybe we have a suffix on the size of the beged. But there's a suffix on this beged whether or not it's chayiv. Imhu midarabanan. What is this garment? Is it a cotton garment? If it's a cotton garment, then according to the Mechaber, it's only chayiv in tzitzis midarabanan. Well, in that case, sveka d'rabanan l'kula. In that case, you would be able to go l'kula. So if you have, according to the Mechaber, if you have a cotton beged in front of you, it's only chayiv in tzitzis midarabanan. Now you have a mixture of tzitzis strings, and we have a suffix on them. I pull out one of the sets of tzitzis strings, and I have a suffix. I don't know if this is a set that was made lishma, or is it a set that wasn't made lishma. Well, since it's only a chiyuv d'rabanan, I could say sveka d'rabanan l'kula, and I'll use it. Or I have this cotton beged in front of me. I'm not sure if it's considered a daled kanfas beged or not. I have a suffix. Well, it's only d'rabanan anyway. It's a suffix d'rabanan l'kula. I could wear it without putting tzitzis on it. But if it's a woolen beged, then it's chayiv midaraisa. Then I can't go l'kula. Then I have to go l'chumra. Then I can't use the suffix strings. And if I have a suffix on the size, or if I have a suffix whether or not it's daled kanfas, I can't wear it without putting tzitzis on it because sveka d'raisa l'chumra. So that was the second nafkamina. Gimel, third nafkamina, between chiyuv d'raisa and chiyuv d'rabanan. Imu yoshev b'tzibur. Let's say you're in shul and you're wearing a talis. V'nifsak echad mitzitziyaisav b'choil. It's not Shabbos, it's during the week. We'll see why that makes a difference. So it's Tuesday morning, and you're sitting in shul, and you're wearing your talis, and suddenly your talis becomes puzzle. The tzitzits rip in such a way that renders it puzzle. Now maybe you're not just sitting, near the back davening. Maybe you're davening for the Amid. You're in the middle of davening Shemona Esrei for the Amid, middle of Chazar Sashatz, and you see that suddenly your talis snagged on something, and your talis became puzzle. Imhu midrabanan. If your talis happens to be a cotton talis, which I never saw in my life, but if your talis is a cotton talis, then according to the Mechaber, it's only chayiv midarabanan. So then, do you have to rip it off right away and stand there without a talis? Maybe not. Yesh loimer kavod abrius doiche d'rabanan. Then kavod abrius, your kavod abrius, your personal kavod, right, is doiche a chiyuv d'rabanan. Ve'ein mechuyev tekef lifshe talisai. So I don't have to take off my talis and be embarrassed standing by the Amid without a talis, because the talis that I'm wearing is cotton. According to the Mechaber, it's only chayiv in tzitzis midarabanan. So yes, it became puzzle, but kavod abrius, I could leave it on. But if I'm wearing a woolen talis, then that talis is chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa. Then kavod abrius, too bad. You have to take the talis off. I am the you'd go. Void nafkaminas harbe, and the Chavetz Chaim says there are additional nafkaminas. Ayin b'pri megadim. He sends us to the pre megadim. Okay, I'm going to push a little further here, even though it's a little bit late, but I want to finish the Mishnah Berurah on this sif. Ice cotton dalid, the Ramad took issue with the Mechaber. The Mechaber said only tzemer and pishtin are chayiv midaraisa. Everything else is only chayiv midarabanan. The Ramad said no, there's a yesh oimrim that says that all four-cornered garments are chayiv midaraisa, not just tzemer upishtim. Now, we said, what's the rationale of the Mechaber? The Mechaber learned out, the Mechaber brought down the Brisa, he didn't bring it down, but the Mishnah Berurah brought down the Brisa, Menachas Lamed Tesamid Beis, that we learn out from Nigei Begadim. By Nigei Begadim, the Torah Kedosha tells us that a beged is tzemer upishtim. If a beged means tzemer or pishtim by nigei begadim, then by tzitzis, where the Torah says beged, it also refers only to a beged made either out of tzemer or pishtim. That's the rationale of the Mechaber. The Ramah argues, and the Ramah goes like the Yesh Omrim, that says no, all begadim are chayiv and tzitzis midaraisa, not only tzemer or pishtim. What's the rationale of the Ramah? The Ramah is paskening like Rava. Rava has a different limud. Let's say Mishnah Berurah is cotton dalim. V'yesh armim dekulu paiskim karava. These sheet is paskin like Rava in the Gemara in Menachos. The Rava Rami. Rava asks a contradiction between psukim. He says, Ksiv, on the one hand, the Torah Kedosha by Tzitzis says, V'nosenu al tzitzis hakanaf pesil techelis. You will place on to the corner of the garment, v'nosnu al tzitzis hakanaf psil techelis. So the Torah Kedosha refers to the tzitzis as the tzitzis hakanaf. And Rava learns from there, mashma, the implication of tzitzis hakanaf, the tzitzis of the corner, the implication of that pasuk is min kenaf. It sounds like what the Torah is telling me is that the tzitzis and the kanaf, the tzitzis and the corner of the beged that the tzitzis are going to be affixed to are inseparable. What do I mean they're inseparable? It sounds like the tzitzis strings should be made out of the identical fabric that the kanaf, that the corner of the beged is made out of. So the implication is you have a beged that's made out of tzemer, then the strings should be tzemer. You have a beged that's made out of pishtan, out of linen, then the strings should be linen. You have a beged that's made out of cotton, then the strings should be made out of cotton. You have a beged that's made out of hemp, then the strings should be made out of hemp. So that's tzitzis hakanaf. On the other hand, says Rava, there's another pasuk. Uksiv, we have another pasuk that says, Lo yisil bashatnes tzemer upishtim yachtav. You're not allowed to wear shatnez. You're not allowed to wear a combination of tzemer upishtim. Gedila tasalach. Gedilim tasalach. Right after the parsha of shatnez comes the parsha of tzitzis. So it says tzemer upishtim yachtav, wool and linen together. Gedilim tasalach. You should make tzitzis. The implication is that tzitzis strings are supposed to be made out of tzemer upishtim. So Rava's got a contradiction over here. He says, on the one hand, we have a pasuk that says, "V'nosenu al tzitzis hakanaf." Because the pasuk refers to the tzitzis as tzitzis hakanaf, the implication is, you know what tzitzis strings should be made out of? Tzitzis strings should be made out of whatever the beged that they're going on is made out of. On the other hand, we have gedilim loisel bashatnes tzemer upishtim yachtav, gedilim tasalach. We have another pasuk that puts tzemer upishtim next to gedilim tasalach. That implication is, you know what tzitzis strings should be made out of? They should be made out of tzemer upishtim. So asks Rava, how do you reconcile these two limudim? Should the tzitzis strings be made out of whatever the beged is made out of? Or should the tzitzis strings be made out of tzemer upishtim? What should they be made out of? Answers Rava, haketzad, how do you reconcile this? So Rava says, I'll tell you how. Tzemer upishtim, tzitzis strings that are made out of wool or out of linen, poitrin, they cover garments, bein beminon, bein shaloi beminon. If you make tzitzis strings made out of wool, or you make tzitzis strings made out of linen, those are universal tzitzis strings. Those tzitzis, they could patter any beged made out of anything. You have a cotton beged, you could patter it with wool tzitzis. You have a hemp beged, you could patter it with wool tzitzis, with linen tzitzis. Whatever your beged is made out of, wool tzitzis strings and linen tzitzis strings are universal. They could patter any garment. Shar minim, you make silk tzitzis string, you make cotton tzitzis strings, b'minon poitron, shaloi b'minon ein poitron. You make cotton tzitzis strings, okay? Cotton tzitzis strings could pater a cotton beged, but they can't pater a woolen beged. They can't pater a hemp beged. They can't pater a silk beged. But what do you see from this? What you see from this is, if Rava is telling you that that's what the pasuk is teaching me, the pasuk is teaching me that woolen tzitzis strings and linen tzitzis strings are universal and they could pater every type of beged. That means that every type of beged needs to have tzitzis, right? Not like the Mechaber. The Mechaber says that al pi dinei Torah, only a woolen beged needs tzitzis, only a linen beged needs tzitzis. If that's true, why does Rava need to tell me that cotton tzitzis strings could pater a cotton beged? A cotton beged is not chayiv, according to the Mechaber. So the Ramah is paskening like Rava. Rava says, no, every type of beged is chayiv. And there's a critical difference between tzitzis strings that are made out of wool or linen, or tzitzis strings that are made out of anything else. Woolen and linen tzitzis strings are universal, and they could pater any kind of beged, even a cotton beged or a silk beged or a hemp beged, any kind of beged. But they're all chayiv tzitzis. They all need to be patered. So they could be patered by universal strings, or a silk beged could be patered by silk strings. Cotton beged could be patered by cotton strings. But you see that all the begadim are chayiv. So there you have the machloikis, the Mechaber, and the Ramah. Umachriya Ramah k'deyazu shekain sfir lu l'rayv ha'achrayim k'Rava lidrash min knaf. Most of the early Rishonim paskin like Rava min knaf ushmamino dechol mine beged chayim min HaTorah b'tzitzis v'yia bibin ha-beged. And we're going to stop over here. Oh no, let's do ice cut and hay. V'hachi hilchasa. You know what? I said we're going to stop here, and some people might have already heard it on the video, and they're going to stop. So we'll just do this ice cut and hay as part of tomorrow's share. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu should send Yeshua's for first pronounced Shedukim Tol al Zanid, and we should be likely to see the BSK Tzedek. B'mhera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.